Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Commission on Connecticut's Development and Future regular commission meeting, Monday, May 1st. It's 3:02 p.m. We'll call it to order. Our clerks are taking attendance and thank those that are in the room here and those that are online. First off, we'll do the approval of the April 3rd minutes. If we could have a motion to accept those.
So moved.
Thank you, Representative. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Representative. Is there any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Thank you. Is there any opposed? Terrific. Thank you. Then the minutes are approved. And we will move right on to our last, but certainly not the least of our working group presentations on sewage. And I know, Donna, you're with us. So do you need us to run the slideshows, or are you going to handle it from there with a screen share?
I think the clerk, Ashley mentioned the clerk would be managing the slideshow.
We're more than happy to do that. Which one? I know there's two of them. Which one are we starting with?
So if I could, I'd just like to start just
Sure.
by introducing, obviously, the draft recommendations and just give some credit where it's due to the working members, the working group members who, if you have it in front of you, you can see. I did have a co-chair, Senator Christine Cohen, at the beginning of this work in the summer of 2022. And then most recently, Representative Gresco, jumped right in, especially during a very busy time of year, to help support what is now in front of you as these final recommendations. If we could start with the deep presentation, what we'd like to do is, because over the many meetings we had in 2022, our agency partners were, critical in teaching all of us really and getting us up to speed as to where things are today regarding alternative treatment systems. And whose jurisdiction is whose and where things fall. And so we had many meetings with our agency stakeholders and partners. And so we felt that it was important for all of you to have a similar level set before we moved into the recommendations. So I wanted to start first with Jennifer Perry, who is the Bureau Chief of the Materials Management and Compliance section at DEEP, to just provide an overview as to what DEEP's roles and responsibilities are at the present moment with regard to sewerage. So I'll turn it over to Jennifer.
Thank you, Donna. Hopefully the clerk will be able to get us to the first slide. In the meantime, I'm Jennifer Perry. As Donna had mentioned, I'm the Bureau Chief for Materials Management and Compliance Assurance here at Connecticut DEEP, which does include our subsurface disposal group. If you want to just go to the next slide, please. So Connecticut DEEP operates under Connecticut General Statute Section 22A 430, which regulates wastewater discharges. And it includes, it establishes and defines categories of discharges, which some of which have been delegated to DPH, some of which we regulate ourselves. We work to ensure compliance with federal and state Clean Water Acts, as well as the Federal Safe Drinking Water Act. Next slide, please. And this is just sort of an overall view of what the current regulatory jurisdiction is. So for a conventional system, and that will be defined as we go, for a conventional system, if that system has a design flow over 7,500 gallons per day, DEEP regulates it, except those systems that are defined as community sewerage systems. All of those community sewerage systems, regardless of design flow, are regulated by DEEP. DEEP also regulates systems that utilize alternative treatment. In 2007, there was a public act that passed that would delegate some small AT systems to Department of Public Health within available resources and upon development of regulations. Those regulations have yet to be established. Therefore, jurisdiction currently remains with Connecticut DEEP. And DEEP also regulates public and private wastewater treatment plants and construction of new sanitary sewers. Next slide, please. So we'll talk a little bit about definitions. Subsurface sewage disposal systems. So those systems are defined by regulation. And it's really what people think of when they think of a septic system, which is sort of the typical septic tank and leach field associated with it. It might have a pump, it might have a siphon, it could have a curtain drain, but it's a very passive system and it doesn't rely on any type of really active technology. A community sewerage system is a system where you have more than one residential structures served by the same system. So some of our larger, some typical facilities that might be covered here are things like apartment complexes, condominium developments, even if they are of a smaller size where the design flow doesn't exceed 7,500 gallons per day. If multiple buildings connect to an individual system, that's defined as a community sewerage system. And those systems are regulated by Connecticut DEEP also. And then the alternative system, alternative sewage treatment system, which essentially is anything other than a conventional subsurface sewage disposal system, and it involves a discharge to the waters of the state. Those are the systems that we're talking about when we talk about alternative treatment systems. Next slide. So Connecticut DEEP's regulatory program is a really site-specific program where this designs of the systems are evaluated on a site-specific basis. It's a two-prong analysis, which looks at both hydraulic capacity of a site. So can a site accept the amount of water proposed to be discharged to it? And then whether or not that site also has the capacity to renovate or dilute pollutants to acceptable levels. We look at both of those parts to identify whether or not it's appropriate to site a system on a specific piece of property. Most of those systems are engineered designs. They can run from simple evaluation through test pits to borings to significant hydraulic load tests. But again, everyone is site specific. And we look at the overall, both the hydraulic capacity and the capacity to treat the wastewater to an acceptable level. Once those systems are evaluated, we have both individual or general permits depending on the type of the system. So a more conventional system might be covered under our general permit process, where an alternative treatment technology would require an individual permit be issued. But each of those permitting processes require the engineering evaluation of the systems, approval of plans and specifications for those systems, and issuance of a permit that has monitoring and maintenance requirements associated with the permit and requires renewal of that permit on a regular basis. And next slide. So Connecticut DEEP also regulates wastewater treatment plants and sewers. So water pollution control plans are required from municipalities that are seeking clean water funds to help fund whatever their project may be, whether it is an upgrade to a wastewater treatment plant, extension of sanitary sewers. Those things must come in and they must have an up-to-date water pollution control plan, which identifies areas of a municipality where sewers exist or where they're planned to be constructed. We evaluate wastewater treatment plant upgrades. We review the design and construction of those and oversee that. We also review sewer extension projects. Those are reviewed and approved both locally and by Connecticut DEEP where state funds are being utilized. And where state funds are being utilized for that wastewater infrastructure, those proposals are also evaluated for consistency with the State Plan of Conservation and Development. And those wastewater treatment plants are also issued permits to discharge, which require regular operation, maintenance, and monitoring, reporting, and renewal on a 5-year basis. So that's really super high, 10,000 foot level of the systems that Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection regulates and the programs that they're regulated under. And that, I think, was all I had for slides. I don't know
Yeah.
if people have questions or if you want to go into the Department of Public Health presentation first and then sort of open up for questions.
Yeah, I was just hoping that we could maybe get through the DPH presentation, and then if folks are okay, perhaps because it will be relevant, to move through our recommendations and then take questions either at the end, or if folks have questions while I'm providing the recommendations, we can do so at that time. So now, if you will all indulge us, I'm going to call on DPH to come forward and present their similar presentation. And for DPH, we have Lori Matthew, who's the Public Health Branch Chief of Environmental Health and Drinking Water, and then Matthew Pollock, who's the Supervising Environmental Engineer in the Environmental Engineering Program. So we can just pull up DPH's presentation. And I'll turn it over to Lori and Matt.
Thank you, Donna. Thank you, everyone. We only have a few slides, and Matt Pollock is the real subject matter expert, so I'm going to turn this over to him. But just at the highest level, the Department of Public Health has overseen public drinking water for well over 100 years, but also has had jurisdiction over septic systems for a very long time as well. So wanted to just lay the groundwork there, because sometimes there's a confusion between what DEEP does versus the jurisdiction of the Department of Public Health. So, so Matt, why don't you take it away with that? Here's the real subject matter expert and supervisor of the what we call the Environmental Engineering Program at the Department of Public Health. Matt?
Great. Thank you, Lori. And thank you, Jen. Jen actually did a very thorough job where a lot of the things that she discussed, I'll just be reiterating. So I appreciate that, Jen. So if we could move to the first slide. Well, first off, again, Matt Pollock, the Supervising Environmental Engineer for the Environmental Engineering Program. I've worked for this program for over 25 years now, so and become the supervisor for a little over a year now. So we can move to the first slide, please. So our program responsibilities I'm going to talk about, touch on the regulatory, statutory responsibilities, our regulatory jurisdiction, and the role of local health departments. Next slide, please. Okay, so our primary role is the administering of the on-site sewage disposal systems, otherwise known as septic systems. And we have a design manual or guide called the Technical Standards, which is a cookbook design that is in conjunction with the regulations that serves as, like I said, a cookbook design for septic system design in Connecticut. And as Jen pointed out, it's your typical conventional septic system, which would consist of a large tank, otherwise known as a septic tank, and a leaching system and a drain field. So specifically what our office does is we oversee those technical standards and regulations. So we get involved in the process when new products are approved, which consists of different components of a sewage disposal system. Most specifically, the leaching products tend to have the most variations in them. But any component has to be approved through our office. We also provide an enormous amount of technical assistance to local health departments and also to other state agencies and even federal agencies on occasion. Next slide, please. So once again, our technical assistance also goes to local engineers and installers. We also license installers as well. There should be a slide up later on. We'll talk about that. But we're basically the experts. And so they consult with us on troubleshooting problems and interpretations of our technical standards and codes. We also issue exceptions to our code, which consists of central systems, offsite systems, otherwise known as easements, and well exceptions. Those are certain situations where if they're doing a repair on a septic system, a pre-existing home, for instance, and the sewage disposal system repair cannot be outside of the well radius. So in other words, the property is so small, it's a pre-existing well and septic system, they have to do a repair. We have no other options. So that specifically has to come to us. We also conduct complaint investigations, enforcement actions against licensed installers and cleaners. So the people that actually install septic systems and pump them out, we license them. And if there's any issues with their conduct or jobs or performance, those matters get vetted through our office and we do investigations on them. And lastly, we also approve large system design plans. So what that means is specifically a large sewage disposal system. So think of anything other than a residential home, a single family home. So it could be something like a shopping plaza or a school with a design flow, a sewage design flow over 2,000 gallons per day. That specifically has to be reviewed by our office rather than just the local health department. That has to come to us for specific approval. Next slide, please. So our statutory responsibilities, I'm not going to go through each one of these, but this just gives you an idea of where all of our powers come from, so to speak, you know, from the water pollution control statute, public health statutes, licensing statutes, even the alternative technologies that Jen pointed out, that was delegated over to our office back in 2007. And unfortunately, we don't have the resources to actually implement that program. So that never took place. And also here's our various citations from our health code that talks about, you know, where the technical standard comes to play, and also our particular jurisdiction in this case for sewage disposal system lies most specifically with the design flow of less than 7,500 gallons per day and less. That means that is regulated by DPH. And also, as Jen pointed out, community systems would not be regulated by our office. So for instance, and we see a lot of this now with a lot of the new developments of you know, residential type of situations where you have multiple apartment buildings or condominium units. And if those multiple apartment buildings and condominium units are on a single parcel and are served by a common sewage disposal system, regardless of the design flow, would still have to be approved by DEEP. Whereas if they had independent, in other words, if each building had its own sewage disposal system and the design flow was less than 7,500 gallons per day collectively on the property, that would be DPH's jurisdiction. And lastly, as Jen pointed out as well, since we have not adopted regulations for the alternative technologies, that still lies within DEEP's jurisdiction. Next slide, please. And some repeat here, of course. I talked about the design flows where our jurisdiction is. Also, we did get delegated responsibilities for water treatment wastewaters recently from DEEP, well, recently within the past 5 to 10 years. That means is when people have water softeners or other water treatment devices, when they have a well, there's a certain thing called backwashing that occurs. There's a waste associated with that. That was actually delegated to our program as well. So we handle that independently of on-site sewage disposal systems. And of course, there's the breakdown with DEEP. And lastly, just want to touch on is local health departments, what specifically is done from local health departments. So I believe I have a slide. Next slide, please. Okay, so the local health departments are the ones that are doing the day-to-day operations and permitting for on-site septic systems that are on-site sewage disposal systems with design flows of less than 7,500 gallons per day. So all the permitting, inspections, and that kind of thing is all done at the local level. So we train those individuals to be able to do that, permit these things and inspect them, but ultimately they're the ones that are issuing the permits and approvals for these sewage disposal systems with design flows is less than 7,500 gallons per day. If they are a large system, we do come out there and do our own inspections, or not inspections rather, but our own soil testing in conjunction with the locals for the larger systems, as I talked about before. But otherwise, everything is all done at the local health departments. They do often call on us for technical assistance, however, and that is something that we do spend an awful lot of time with as well. And lastly, just to go through the last bulleted item, one of our regulations talks about when you do certain activities on a property and you have a sewage disposal system, you have to evaluate your sewage disposal system before we can approve that activity. And just in a nutshell, what exactly that means is just think of this: if I want to put an additional bedroom on my house, or if I want to build a garage, let's say, things that might have an effect on my septic system. So in other words, if I add additional bedroom, that means that potential occupancy can go up, and therefore we need to look at our septic system to ensure that it's not going to fail. And in the case of a garage or another structure, it can take away physical space on our property. And if we have a small piece of property, we don't want to take away space that we might otherwise need for a septic repair. I believe that's the last slide, but please advance. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori and Matt. That was helpful. And I so hope that was helpful for the general commission members. It was helpful for our committee. I think we had those presentations done on repeat, actually. At least I did, just because of how technical all of that information is. So I understand if you don't necessarily understand everything that was discussed just now, because that's kind of where I was after the first iteration of that. So starting into the actual recommendations, it was really the feeling of the subcommittee that, because as they'd mentioned, in 2007, regulations or DPH was responsible to take over 7,500 gallons or the alternative treatment systems, and no regulations were developed. Obviously, resources became our problem. And we just felt that the best way to start would be to really do a comprehensive study of the regulatory framework in other areas on these other non-conventional treatment systems and alternative treatment systems. Instead of sort of throwing things against the wall, we thought it would be best to just really level set and start with a comprehensive study. So we would conduct a data-driven study of other states and county sewerage programs with a focus on the O and ATS, identifying the following: resources necessary for the study's success and future use, which would include contracted consultants, internal staffing requirements, and capital funds. A compilation of programs developed by the different states with a focus on New England states, successes and what program elements made them successful, the level at which each project is managed, whether it be local, county, or state, and by what means, so permitting or regulation, to explore where alternatives are better suited, to understand who would have oversight over the management of these systems, and what would that entail to oversee these systems. And the sub 6A would be required level of operation and maintenance, the service provider, the cost of service, who pays for the service, required monitoring, sampling and reporting, and maintenance. And then sub 4A, service provider, information tracking, compliance activities, and what entity receives reports and at what level for the review and auditing. 7, the examination of sewer capital reserve requirements should be implemented based on other state regulations for common ownership associations. And then 8, just any general learnings that folks in the New England region have had that we can learn from and not make the same mistakes. And then in the first recommendation B, there was also discussion around the development of an education program for other treatment systems to be explored, for either that for testing or to create a study center, similar to ones, I guess, that exist in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. And the subcommittee didn't see it necessary, after consulting with DEEP and DPH, to test the viability in the technology of these systems. However, using the specific or the scientific expertise at UConn and CASE, obviously we have those resources in state, or potentially partnering with other testing facilities, such as the one in Massachusetts in Barnstable County, could be valuable in developing a program for education or training. And this is just to create sustainability and obviously, if there was to be this type of program, opportunities for collaboration with other state agencies. Recommendation 2, and here's where we really talked about collaboration, coordination with the various agencies and other stakeholders with regard to these O and ATS systems. The Sewerage Subcommittee recommended that there be the development, when in the development of municipal local plans of conservation and development, that infrastructure, specifically water and sewer intersections, would be included. Currently, the municipal plans of conservation and development include the requirement to identify sewerage system infrastructure in Connecticut General Statute Section 8-23G. However, under Connecticut General Statute 8-23F, there is the word may, which we are recommending should be shall, to include the addition of capacity, general location, extent, and again, capacity is here twice, so sorry about that. But that to also just have some more oversight and review of these plans by DEEP and DPH, and to provide for more coordination and potentially oversight by the COGS for these systems, or these plans rather. And the third recommendation would be that we would want to see better coordination between DEEP and DPH. I think in presentations we just heard from, there obviously is coordination happening now, but we're looking to enhance that coordination. State agency actions must be consistent with the state plan of conservation and development, including the sewer extensions under the purview of DEEP and the water extensions under the purview of DPH. Examining the rationale and clarifying jurisdiction and enforcement authority over common ownership systems, the 7,500 gallons per day division. And the evaluation of adequacy of resources for oversight and enforcement of failed systems, and the review of water pollution control plans and new permits. And it was thought that perhaps developing a statewide database system for all agencies would be helpful to create, again, more coordination across agencies. And the fourth and final recommendation is that there be better communication and coordination amongst municipal, state government, and COGS, with considerations including requiring the water pollution control authorities to prepare and regularly update water pollution control plans at intervals to be determined, adding wastewater systems to the required infrastructure identified in municipal plans of conservation and development, and requiring plans of conservation and development and water pollution control plans to be consistent with the state plan of conservation and development. So those are our recommendations. I know I went through that pretty fast, but happy to take questions, obviously leaving the technical questions to the agency experts online.
Sure, go ahead, Tim.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Donna, Jennifer, Matt, Lori, thank you for your work on these issues. As you could probably guess, I've been waiting for this report because as you know, I've been dealing with these issues on behalf of both towns and property owners for the better part of 30 years. And I've written articles about how sewer systems can be used and misused. And sometimes, you know, I mean, this commission is partly focused on developing housing, and you know, we've all seen instances where towns unfortunately have used the sewer system to prevent multifamily and affordable housing. So my questions are sort of in that vein. So the first question is recommendation 1B, the education program for other treatment systems. Education program for whom? Can you spell that out for us?
Yeah, I don't think there wasn't a lot of specificity around who this would be for. Honestly, it was, I think, just generally perhaps municipalities, residents, agency stakeholders. So we really didn't specify any specific individual or entity.
Okay. Second and third question, and I'm going to apologize in advance. Again, I applaud your efforts, and I know this was a group effort and so forth, but the first recommendation is as to alternative treatment systems that there should be a study. What I guess I was under the impression that the group's task was to do such a study, not recommend a future study. And the same thing with regard to recommendation 3. As we all know, you know, this issue of DEP and DPH and their competing jurisdiction, this has been an issue for decades. And the recommendation is that there needs to be better coordination. I guess I would just ask the group discuss how the coordination could be improved now, as opposed to just saying there needs to be better recommendation. And please don't take my questions as critical. We're all in the same boat here. We're trying to advance the ball, but I was a little bit surprised by the recommendations that they didn't appear more to be in the nature of advancing the ball. So please take them in that vein. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim. I absolutely do not take offense to any of your questions. I think they're well thought out, and you obviously have experience in this area. The conversation, I have to admit, was it was difficult at times. I think folks, to the credit of the agencies, they are managing a lot with protecting the environment, protecting public health and drinking water, and then balancing the needs of development and obviously underdevelopment, affordable housing, and the needs and wants of the state in that area. There was a lot of discussion, with the agencies, and I think if I can, just to be honest, I think the main issue really lies in the lack of resources to do real work in this area, on behalf of both DEEP and DPH. I think if we as a state feel this is a priority, resources I believe would be the number one solution or request. I mean, it wasn't something we wanted to necessarily recommend as one of our recommendations. The study was really, we were hopeful that the study would just really clearly identify, the amount of resources necessary to really make this a successful program, and one that can is similar to the successful programs that are in existence in other parts of New England. And I don't know if that answers your question, Tim, but I tried the best I could to.
Okay. Well, I thank you it's a tough set of questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I think if I could, Donna, just to add to that for Tim, I think the idea that, AT systems can be complicated, right? They can be costly, and they can be costly to maintain. And so the idea of looking at what other states are doing, especially what I understand and learning about New York and Suffolk County in particular. I know I see Matt shaking his head there. He knows a lot more than I do on this topic, but there are people that are doing this around us that have done this for a long time. And there are state, county governments that have done this. And we really should look at what they're doing and bring the best of what we learned to Connecticut to help us apply that in the best way that we can. So I think that's where this, like to Donna's point, I think that's where we were landing, is that, we had a lot of thoughts, people had ideas, and they've heard about Rhode Island and Massachusetts and New York, but nobody really had a good handle on who's doing it right, who has the best program, and what could we use here in Connecticut that makes sense for us in the situations that we have. So I think that's where we were coming from. I just wanted to add that.
Thank you, Laura. I appreciate that.
Are there any other questions? Just use your raised hand feature, and in the room here, Francis.
Yes, using my raise hand feature in person. Thank you, Martin. I applaud the work the subcommittee has done, and I understand how complex this can be, especially for common ownership associations, which may not have the experience or resources to maintain these systems. I especially applaud the focus on studying what has and has not worked in other states, so we learn from successes and do not repeat others' errors, and ensuring that there is adequate testing and inspection, maintenance, and reasonable capital reserve requirements, because we know what happens when an HOA can't maintain things. It either falls apart or it falls to the public taxpayer to solve the problem. I have a number of comments, maybe not questions, and I understand that your scope was focused largely on looking at other non-conventional alternative treatment systems. But if we are looking at evaluating our standards in this regard, some other considerations may be worth at least mentioning in passing. For those of you who follow Chuck Marone's Strong Towns movement, we have built a lot of infrastructure in this country that we cannot afford to maintain. That's why we have 19th century rail bridges, and that's why we have lead and wood water pipes in many of our communities. We have municipal public water and sewer systems that are financially underwater over the long term, and they would love to have more ratepayers. So some mention of the ability to help subsidize necessary long-term maintenance through bringing more customers to existing systems would be helpful. I don't know if other states have done that. We have discussed water efficiency for years. We are now a laggard in New England. Maine has pulled ahead of us. New York has pulled ahead of us in water efficiency standards. The less water we use through our plumbing fixtures, the less wastewater demand we generate. And we can help solve some of our development impediments in Connecticut by ensuring that new development is more efficient and that we comprehensively retrofit existing development to be more efficient. It's much cheaper to retrofit than to build new capacity in a septic system or in a public water system. We've been talking about affordable housing here. Multifamily housing can be expensive because once you start building up, different building code requirements apply, from fire protection to access, such as elevators. One of the cheapest ways to add more housing to the state is to add starter homes, which we've not built since the 1940s and 1950s. Beautiful manufactured starter homes are available these days. However, they do depend upon wells and septic. And our current septic design standards, which I don't believe the committee reviewed, assumes that every house has at least 3 bedrooms. We don't allow smaller septic systems, which means less land, although you still need separation between wells and septic. So that may be an option to help utilize some of the undersized parcels we have out there and bring in more buildings. I should note the most recent update to the state building code as of this last year specifically provides for tiny houses. And then the last point / question is, we've talked a little bit about looking towards other states and counties in other states for best practices. Of course, Connecticut has not had county government in 60 years. And one of the questions I would have is, much of this authority is delegated to local health districts and local health departments and regional health districts. Are these small agencies necessarily the best model for sewerage and septic issues, especially as we're talking about increasing complexity with these other non-conventional alternative treatment systems? Or should we consider larger entities, perhaps regional, perhaps the COGS, perhaps not, that have the ability to have more staff and more specialized expertise? And I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Francis. Are there any other comments or questions? Hearing or seeing none. Thank you, Donna.
I think,
My hand is,
yeah, I think Anika
yeah,
has
my
a
hand is
question.
raised.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Anika.
That's okay. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great, thanks. Before I get to what I was going to say, I just want to, I agree with what Mr. Pickering just said about starter homes. Obviously, in order to get those done, we'd also need to maybe strongly suggest to some of the towns in the COG for which he works that they decrease their minimum lot sizes from 4 or 2 to half or a quarter or an eighth. Folks on this call, some folks on this call, but probably not all, are probably not aware that Connecticut's got the largest minimum lot sizes in the country, and in most of the country. Tim could probably rattle off the number because the home builders do this math. The average minimum lot size is something like between an eighth and a quarter of an acre. So a couple things. So one of the problems in this area is that when we suggest to towns that they decrease their minimum lot sizes, they say, well, we have to have large minimum lot sizes because of sewer and water issues. Now all of you have just heard how DEEP and DPH regulate sewer and water quality issues. You know, I like the members of the New Haven City Plan Commission just fine, but the small business owners and retired civil rights attorneys and general contractors who are appointed by our mayor to serve on that board have literally zero, and they would tell you, literally zero expertise in waste treatment and water issues. Nevertheless, in our surrounding towns, the zoning officials pretend like they know stuff about water and sewer, and that therefore informs their minimum lot sizes. You know, one thing I think the committee could have done, and maybe we ought to do, is simply tell town zoning officials that they cannot make zoning decisions based on water and sewer issues, that those are the purview of DEEP and DPH. And if they cite to water and sewer issues, they've got to be able to cite to some kind of determination letter, site specific, from a state agency that confirms that they're not completely full of it when they pretend like what they're doing is protecting our environment rather than their segregated cities. The second thing I'd say is, if we focus entirely on increasing capacity and increasing existing systems, we are deciding to basically forestall development into a very small portion of the state where those systems exist. And we're already seeing increasing NIMBYism in Stamford and Norwalk and in New Haven. And I wish it weren't true, but I don't think that the residents of those cities that have accommodated all of the development basically in Connecticut of the last 30 years are going to continue to bear that burden for the rest of you. I don't think it is a burden, but I do think that people, you know, are going to resist at some point when you say, well, Fairfield doesn't have to build any units and Norwalk and Bridgeport should build 50,000 because the state needs 80 to 100,000 new units. We need to build more capacity. I mean, we just have to. We live in a state where towns will point to sewerage as a reason to deny housing development, typically multifamily, but they're also the reason that there are no new sewers, right? They're not building out capacity. They're leaning into sewer avoidance policy as if sewer avoidance is inherently good. Sewer avoidance is a financial decision. It's not it's not a pro-environment decision. And we need to be a little bit more forceful, I think, as a state, if we want our employers to be able to find employees, if we want our residents not to be paying an arm and a leg for housing, then we need to be a little bit more forceful about anticipating future development as this commission was authorized to do. I want to echo everything Tim said with, he said, I'm not going to be frustrated or angry about this. I am really frustrated and angry. I am looking forward to the recommended committees, this committee's recommended committees, future recommendation that we form another committee. I mean, I think we could do this going forever. I'm going to start putting money on how many committees get formed in the future. And I have to say, like, the legislature's propensity to create committees was a joke that I used to make and nobody else used to understand. But Connecticut residents are starting to notice that this legislature's got a habit of forming study committees. And I guess I'd add to that frustration, a habit of passing laws 16 years ago that never get implemented. It's embarrassing. And I guess I'll just leave it at that. Thanks.
Thank you, Anika. Is there anyone else on the topic here? Okay, seeing no others, I do want to thank, well, actually I should ask Representative Gresco as the new co-chair. I just wanted to make sure, see if you had any comments you wanted to make.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. I'm good. I came in at the 11th hour on this, so it was a quick tutorial as far as reading goes, but I want to thank everyone for the work they've done over the past year to 18 months to make this happen, and in full support of the recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. And Donna, thank you very much, as well as Jennifer, Lori, and Matthew for your presentations today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving on then, under our business, just a couple of items. Just as follow-up, House Bill 6647, which is on the State Plan of Conservation and Development. It is on the House calendar number 88, so you can follow that there. That was the recommendations this commission made earlier in the year for that. Our next meeting, June 12th, in which we will start looking through all of the legislative recommendations. I will make sure we send out the Excel spreadsheet, which has all of the working group recommendations kind of in a summary format in that. So we'll start going through all of that. in the month of June and July are reviewing all those recommendations. So that way by the fall, we can know where we're going and work on our draft report for our final report submission in January. With that, I don't have any other business on the agenda. Is there any public comment? We have none in the room here, and I'm not seeing any raised hands online for Tim Hollister. Thank you.
Hi. I just, before we adjourn, could you give us a little more guidance as to where you see the process going? And we do have the spreadsheet of legislative recommendations. Is our charge between now and the end of our term at the end of this year to come up with a set of recommendations for the 2024 legislative session? Is there something else we're going to be doing? Okay, I just, maybe I'm asking a question that is on the minds of others also. Thank you.
Sure. Thanks, Tim. And that's a good segue. And the simple answer is yes. The way you kind of explained it is yes, we'll be looking through all the recommendations, looking about which ones, this commission wishes to adopt. Any legislative proposals, obviously we'd be putting forth for the next legislative session. So that'll all be kind of the process. And I know Representative Rojas couldn't be here today, but we will meet and kind of review, kind of solidify that process. And when we send out the, legislative list again, we'll kind of have a little summary there as well as kind of the process of moving this forward for everybody. Okay. Is there any other comments? Then hearing none, we will take a motion to adjourn at 3:48 p.m. So moved and seconded. Thank you. All those in favor? Aye.
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 Thank you all very much. Have a wonderful afternoon.